Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest.
I want to talk about something important today, because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram.
January 9th, 2025, the one Measly Report edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast from a extremely snowy and bitterly cold Washington, D.C. Joining me, of course, is Emily Bazelon of the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School. Hello, Emily.
Hey, David.
And John, I think, is on Carter funeral duty. So he's not with us this morning. No worries. We have beloved guest host Juliette Kayyem. Juliette is professor at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. She's also the author of The Devil Never Sleeps, Learning to Live in the Age of Disasters, which is a good book to be talking about in a week of natural disaster. This week on the Gabfest, after all that, after the endless malfeasance, the civil liability, the criminal conviction, so many indictments, the Trump legal peril will end this week probably with one little report. Then the platforms and the billionaires surrender. The metaverse failed Mark Zuckerberg. So why not the MAGAverse? We're going to talk about the abject capitulation of the billionaires to Trump. Then the Los Angeles fires and what they signal about climate and urban resilience. Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter. So I'm really interested in hearing what Emily Bazelon is going to say on this topic. I'm very excited about this. There's a legal war that Donald Trump has been engaged in. I don't want to say there's a war that's been engaged against Trump. I think he's committed all kinds of legal wrongdoing. And as a result, the legal system has been trying to hold him to account. And these many wrongdoings, these many legal provocations and in some cases probably crimes. And it's all going to wind up this week with essentially complete victory for the president-elect. He's been credibly accused of crimes, convicted of 34 criminal counts, found civilly liable in a sexual assault. But he won at the Supreme Court. He found an extremely favorable judge in Florida. He delayed, he deflected, and now will enter office again as president with, at the very worst, facing no punishment for his criminal conviction beyond the name of a sentencing hearing, and having to explain just a single report from Jack Smith, who seems to have been working with a team of many for years and will end up producing basically nothing out of it. So it's, to my mind, just a complete triumph over what seemed to be a devastating set of legal problems, isn't it, Emily?
Right. And we don't even know whether we're going to get the report from Jack Smith or whether it will have, in fact, it will probably not have anything about the Mar-a-Lago case in it. It will probably be confined to the facts of the January 6th allegations against Trump. And we don't also know, taping on Thursday morning, whether the sentencing is going to proceed on Friday or not. So even the very small crumbs of accountability that are left on the table could be washed away. So I think we should talk about each in turn, because they're both kind of tricky legally, but also astounding for the reasons that you were setting up, the kind of lack of accountability. With the Justice Department's reports, Judge Cannon, the kind of infamous judge in the Mar-a-Lago case who has done Trump some kind of amazing legal favors before, issued this, it was like a jaw-dropping order this week. She said that the Justice Department could not release the reports. She didn't differentiate between the part of the report that's about the January 6th case in Washington, which has nothing ever to do with her courtroom, and the Mar-a-Lago documents case. Even the Mar-a-Lago documents case is not actually before her anymore. It's not in her courtroom. It's on appeal with the 11th Circuit. And so in blocking the release of the report in this sweeping order, she kind of created this amazing opening for Trump escaping accountability. And, he doesn't want a bad news cycle out of this. And if he can prevent the embarrassment, he will. And the two lawyers who are representing him are about to be top officials in the Justice Department. So you have this kind of amazing moment right before power changes in which they're already trying to express power. And the last part of this is that now it seems as if Attorney General Garland is backing away from releasing the Mar-a-Lago report with or without the court's permission, like even if the 11th Circuit overturns Judge Cannon's order. And his rationale for that in the legal filings is that Trump has these two co-defendants. These guys were working with him. Maybe the report could do them harm. Okay, that seems like responsible thing for the Justice Department to worry about. However, once Trump gets into office, it is absolutely inevitable that the charges are going to be dropped against these two defendants. And so it just seems as if one side is playing in the kind of old-fashioned, well-behaved rules of law, and the other side just like absolutely does not care one whit about any of that. And that clash is just like hard to take.
Let's talk, Emily. You mentioned there's the reports, but there's also the criminal case in New York where Judge Merchan has Trump scheduled to be sentenced, and Trump has appealed the idea that he would be sentenced. Merchan has already said he will not give Trump prison time or probation or anything, that he's being sentenced to nothing, but he's being sentenced so that he will be a felon if the sentencing is allowed to go through, right?
Right. I mean, this is pretty symbolic. The New York courts so far have said the sentencing should proceed. Trump is making a last-ditch appeal to the Supreme Court, which will probably rule by Friday. And the idea here is, hey, remember that like huge grant of immunity you gave me over the summer? Well, that should apply here. I should be basically, because I have arguments on the table that some of the evidence in the New York case could be an official act. I mean, footnote, this is like a pretty implausible argument, or at least like a pretty out there one if you're talking about what really supports this conviction. But okay, he has these arguments. He's arguing now, however, that as a result of those unresolved disputes, he shouldn't even be sentenced. And to make that argument, you have to say that you're suffering irreparable harm. How do you have irreparable harm out of an unconditional discharge, which is the fancy way of saying no probation, no jail, no nothing? I mean, Juliette, what do you make of all of this?
Yeah, I look at it from the perspective of the autocratic tendencies of Trump and how do you counter them as he enters his second term. And I think it's a sort of ironic or coincidence of timing, the fact that all of this is coming to a head for obvious reasons, suggests that the experiment of believing that the law would solve the Trump issue is over. And it was incredibly frustrating to hear and read and see on TV all these lawyers saying, this is the case that's going to get him. This is the thing that's going to get him. And you know what? I mean, you said it in terms of playing by the rules. It's an insufficient counter to how Trump plays this game. And shame on us, meaning shame on people who are worried about what is about to unfold policy-wise, forget the legal side, policy-wise, for putting this in the hands of lawyers who were just not up to the challenge. They just weren't. And the fact that Garland...
What do you mean by that?
The fact that Garland is even saying what he's going to do, just do it. Just release the report, and then explain in the release of the report, even if it's just half of it, that the court order did not extend to this piece of the report. And we're doing it. But now we've we've now given 48 hours or however long for someone to step in and try to stop it from happening. I don't think this Justice Department was built for the resistance. It was built for a lot of good things. I'm going to get into that in a second, but not it. The second is, look, there's lots of ways that democratic countries, can counter things that aren't dependent on, is the Supreme Court on our side? And we're seeing that experiment across the world. It's not perfect, but you look at South Korea, Brazil, Italy. I mean, countries that have had autocratic leaders either can go after them through criminal law, go after them through basically, extending a voluntary exodus by the leader. But you look at Italy, they just tired of it. I mean, they essentially just tired of the kind of conduct that was similar to Trump with Berlusconi. So, I mean, that's it.
They do have an ultra right wing leader, however. They've elected, so they don't have Berlusconi, but they do have an ultra right wing leader.
But they didn't before that. I mean, in other words, Berlusconi was a character of one, right? I mean, in other words, and more akin to Trump, in which the oxygen just you couldn't get oxygen outside of him. But I just want to add, I think the big test is going to be, or the big issue ahead is going to be what Trump does on the January 6th defendants. I mean, he talked a big talk. It's interesting to see he is somewhat walking away from a full, unconditional pardon for all of them. I don't know where that's coming from. I never thought the law would get Trump. I'm going to be very curious in terms of what it means for the resistance, but what it also means for radicalization if he gets these 1,000 people and lets them go out.
So I want to talk about whether we thought the law would get Trump, because I'm unclear. I'm really interested in your guys' thoughts on this. Whether this is a failure of the legal system, like the legal system could have done something and was unable to. It was unable to either because Merrick Garland was inefficient, or because it was like subverted by Aileen Cannon, or whether the legal system was always subservient, secondary to the larger forces in politics, which the lawyers had no control over. And once those forces kind of had their say, with the election primarily, but in other ways too, the legal stuff was always always a mirage. It was never going to be the determining factor in squeezing Trump out.
I mean, I think that if Garland had started right away trying to investigate, hold Trump accountable, that it's possible this would have played out differently, because part of what happened was the clock ran out. On the other hand, I don't think the politics would have allowed for that in the same way before the congressional investigation of January 6th. I mean, that was really what pushed Garland ahead. And then you just also have like the character of this attorney general and this Justice Department, which, as Juliette was saying, was just not aggressive.
And also I would add the character of the Supreme Court, the nature of the Supreme Court, which is which when you think about it, is a political construct. The Supreme Court has been constructed politically to reach the ends it reached around the prosecution of Trump. I mean, I feel that the Supreme Court's role in the legal cases against Trump is a manifestation of the political system, not a manifestation of the legal system.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
I think that's fair. I also think it was really surprising. The breadth of the immunity ruling took a lot of people, including me, by surprise. And maybe that was naive.
I mean, I think the legal strategy needed a political voice, and we lost it early on after January 6th. I've long believed, and maybe I'm wrong or naive to believe this, but McConnell had a moment, had that moment. Had he stuck to that moment, this would have been over by mid 2021. He would have been isolated. The cases would have gone forward. The January 6th cases would have gone forward. And there would be a political reflection that this was the right thing to do. And this is kind of what you're seeing in South Korea, right? It's not the law that's getting them. It's because the prime minister, who had declared essentially, emergency state out of just because he couldn't get what he wanted politically, it was when the legislature in South Korea turned against him, then the law just flows, right? Then, and I think that was the problem. And I think that's often true. I think that whether it was the politics or the narrative of what was going on had to lead, the law would have been more easily able to follow that. It just had no partnership. Garland was maybe not the right person for the right moment. That will be people's judgment. That may be true of various people in the Biden administration, but the fault lies in the party Trump first, the party that didn't see its moment to rid all of us of this. They could have had a different conservative. And then, of course, the American public. Don't forget, the American public didn't buy it either. I mean, it's just ridiculous, but they didn't.
Yeah, I think that's really smart to remember that even though formally speaking, law and politics are on different tracks, actually, of course, there's a relationship between them all along the way. I just want to go back to something you said earlier, Juliette, about how Garland should have just released these reports. I feel like if you could go back 2 weeks, that's the right answer. Once there is this court order from Judge Cannon, I think the answer to that is no. And the reason I say that is I feel very sensitive right now to setting a precedent for defying court orders. That's something that we are going to be worried about during the Trump administration. And so I think that the Justice Department kind of misplayed its hand leading up to this point with Judge Cannon, but now it needs to be clear from a court that this order does not apply to the January 6th part of the report that Garland wants to release.
But why couldn't he just assert that? I'm not asking him to violate a court order. I'm saying we interpret this court order to not include provisions that have nothing, that's lots of negatives, to exclude parts of the report that do not implicate other defendants, nor that the court has any jurisdiction under. She's now being given the opportunity to clarify and cover everything. The court ruling can be properly interpreted that she has no jurisdiction to make a decision about a case where there are no defendants that are arguably before her court. And now, I don't think this report's going to be released. I think this idea that we've now...
The January 6th part or the Mar-a-Lago?
The January 6th, because I think a court's probably going to step in.
On the January 6th part? Or the Mar-a-Lago part?
The January 6th part, the part that he says he's going to release.
Oh, I think that'll be released.
That the 11th Circuit is going to agree with Cannon and then block him?
I'm just worried Cannon's going to do something.
But they have time to go up to the 11th Circuit. I feel like the best answer is that the 11th Circuit smacks her down, and then we're like,
and they have done that. That's true.
Yeah, we'll see. But there's enough time that I would like an answer to that. I would rather have the court resolve this super ridiculous ambiguity than the Justice Department.
Okay, we'll talk on January 19th. How you feel?
Famous last words.
Can I ask two specific questions? One is sort of like how will this unfold in the world? So I'm going to assume, for the sake of this question, that the Mar-a-Lago documents report is not going to be allowed to be released because Garland has basically signaled he won't. So and I know that some people on Jack Smith's staff have made a surreptitious copy of that report. We all know that someone has made a copy.
And also, Garland said he was planning to share it with the heads of the House Intelligence and Intelligence
And
committees.
So I'm very curious, literally, what will the disposition of that report? Because the Trump people will come in, they'll pardon, Trump will pardon Walt Nauta and the other guy, and they'll declare Jack Smith's,
they'll delete it.
They will delete everything, and they'll probably burn all the documents. But how will this thing get out? Because we know it's going to get out. It's going to come out because it exists. Yeah. The other report, we know it will come out. It's just a question of how it literally makes its way to one of Emily's colleagues at the New York Times, which it will.
I honestly think that the conduit through Congress is more promising than the conduit through the Justice Department. That when you think about who has what to lose professionally, who could be prosecuted for exactly what you're talking about, which
they will go after whoever it is.
Yeah, the Trump DOJ is super eager to get these folks anyway.
My second question, my other question is, will Trump ever have to pay E. Jean Carroll?
Oh, I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah.
You think he will? You think that the court will find a way? Yeah, but do you think he'll ever actually pay, or he's just going to find excuses and never do it and never do it and
like
never
his taxes? Yeah, maybe.
Like Rudy Giuliani. That's so.
Maybe maybe he'll get Amazon to pay him for a documentary. Like they did Melania Trump.
That's our next topic.
I know. But let me just say one thing about this. These reports, right? I feel like we're, going through this again. We've done this for 4 years, which is some belief that the truth, right? Oh, he did X, Y, or Z. That's our eureka moment. Without a sort of political support, Democrats are in the minority and all these reports are going to land. They will satisfy our priors. He did X, Y, and Z, which we already know he did. But now they're going to, it's going to just reconfirm everything we already know. Maybe there's one or two things that we didn't know before that are outrageous, but nothing surprises us anymore. And then we're going to go on. Now, look, we'll talk about history and the meaning of this and why it's important to document these. But the idea that this will wound Trump, this part of his behavior will wound Trump. I think the evidence suggests that didn't work. And so, just so that everyone can focus on these reports, but he's moving on. I mean, he clearly doesn't want these to be public, and it's just gonna satisfy all of our priors, but nothing else.
I mean, I totally agree with that. I think the likelihood that it is that what matters here is how the legal system is failing to operate properly, not what is actually the content of the reports in terms of some revelation. It's like the preview of, Trump, of capitulation.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Home Chef. The holidays are over. Cold weather is still here where I am. Snow, ice everywhere. No worries, because Home Chef is delivering hearty recipes and comfort foods to help me and you stay cozy. So I have a Home Chef garlic ginger tofu taco coming to me in a couple of days. I'm super excited about. I'm a big fan of Home Chef. Their recipes are extremely delicious, first of all. So they're the blood orange pork chop with pistachios that I made a couple months ago. I just think about it all the time. I've tried to recreate it in my own home. It was a delicious meal. And Home Chef recipes are beautifully designed. They're super easy to execute. The instructions are clear as can be. The ingredients are absolutely pristine, delicious, fresh, tasty. It's wonderful. And that's why users of leading meal kits have rated Home Chef #1 in quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering Political Gabfest listeners 18 free meals, plus free dessert for life, and of course, free shipping on your first box. Go to homechef.com/Gabfest. That's homechef.com/Gabfest for 18 free meals and free dessert for life. Homechef.com/Gabfest. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by GiveWell. GiveWell, a nonprofit that researches and recommends giving opportunities, is committed to maximizing the impact of donations. Each recommendation is grounded in months of rigorous research and transparency to ensure your contribution has the greatest possible impact on the world. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they found. Over 125,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving, so you can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. And you can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell does not take a cut. If you've never used GiveWell to donate, you can have your donation matched up to $100 as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org and pick podcast and enter Political Gabfest at checkout. Make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from the Political Gabfest to get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Bombas. Well, it's officially too cold to do anything, but the upside is you can cocoon yourself in Bombas socks, slippers, and underwear all winter long. I am literally cocooned right now as I'm taping this in Bombas socks. My Bombas socks are by far my favorite socks I've ever owned. They are warm, they're high performance, they are clingy, they've got incredible elasticity, but also breathability. They're elegant as hell. I adore my Bombas socks, and they're super cozy. And the secret of that is their fabrics. They use really great fabrics. They use merino wool, for example, and they thought of every detail. No itchy tags, no annoying toe seam. And their slippers, those may end up being your favorite because they have this warm Sherpa lining and marshmallow-like cushioning. But it doesn't matter what Bombas you get. Every item you purchase, Bombas will donate another item to someone facing homelessness. Plus, Bombas makes returns and exchanges easy. So try Bombas now. Head over to bombas.com/political and use code political for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/political, code political at checkout. Well, if that was the preview of Capitulation, we also have Capitulation live in theaters already. Capitulation is playing at screens near you, whether it's your Meta screen, your Amazon screen, or your X screen. Mark Zuckerberg brought Meta fully into compliance with Trumpism this week. He appointed Meta's top Republican Joel Kaplan to lead public policy efforts at the company. He named Trump ally Dana White to Meta's board. And more relevantly, he ended all fact-checking efforts by Meta, moved all content moderation, such as it is from California to Texas, because Texans are not as biased as Californians, apparently, permitted more what they call civic content, but what really is political content, particularly sort of hateful political content in general. Introduced something called sort of community notes, whereby there would be community moderation or community commenting on the truth or accuracy of things, an effort that is like doomed to fail. Stopped limits on almost all hateful speech, and generally did everything that conservatives have been asking for him to do on the Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp platforms. It was like the full imperial curtsy, and he now joins his old rival Elon Musk in putting his platform not quite in the same way. He hasn't quite put his platform in the service of Trumpism the way that Musk has put his platform literally in the service of Trumpism, has put X in the service of Trumpism. But he's taking the side of, I'm going to be on the side of the administration. And Jeff Bezos also, Juliette nodded at this a second ago, Jeff Bezos says Amazon seems to have paid Melania Trump millions of dollars to make a TV series about her that she controls. So to publish propaganda about Melania Trump, and she gets money for it. So like, it's all grotesque. It's also, Emily Bazelon, completely unsurprising. It's like the transactional corruption that we knew was going to happen with this time around. And here it is happening in full visibility in real time.
Yes, to all of that. I mean, I want to talk about Meta because these changes are just outrageous cumulatively. And, I really am struggling with a lot of the reporting that's soberly crediting Mark Zuckerberg for like going back to his pro free speech roots, as if he has some actual free speech philosophy, when in fact he is just totally blowing with the wind, like, letting his kind of right-wing side win because that's the thing that will make him the most money now to do. And, when I started, I know I've talked about this in the past, when I started reporting on how Facebook was making life really hard for kids, and this is like, 2005 to 2010, like all this bullying and harassment, they were so cavalier about it, so unwilling to intervene. And that same attitude carried them right through 2016, all the problems with our democracy and with other, ethnic violence in other countries that they've been held responsible for up through January 6th. And then there's this kind of retrenching moment in which I think Zuckerberg feels like he has no choice but to introduce fact checking and some standards for what's going to circulate that restricts some speech, restricts some ugly speech, some hate speech, and restrict political content. And now all of that's out the window. In addition to the fact that they have gotten rid of these independent third-party fact checkers, they also are going to make people's feeds much more awash in content about politics. It's all going to happen at the same time. And, for Zuckerberg to claim that this is like part of the cultural moment because it stressed people out to hear about politics leading up till now, but now this is what everybody wants. Like, what is he even talking about?
Kevin Roose had some good reporting arguing that this reflects Zuckerberg's actual political proclivities. He's a middle-aged white dude who loves mixed martial arts. He has a history of libertarianism. He hunts. He built Facebook as a hotness rating software program.
And he couldn't get the left to love him when he was doing things like funding the 2020 election.
Yeah, I mean, right? I spent a little bit of time with Facebook and a very little bit of time around Zuckerberg many years ago. And when you thought about which companies in the tech world were good and which were, they always seemed completely evil to me. Like, unlike Google, which I think is a real mixed bag, and unlike Amazon and Apple, which I think are a real mixed bag, Facebook always seemed, or Meta, whatever you fucking call it, always seemed like a deeply unkind, greedy, callous company. And that felt like it came from the top. It felt like Zuckerberg would put on whatever face was convenient to put on. But ultimately, he's a dude who's like, he wanted to be rich and he wanted to be powerful, and he kind of didn't care who got stomped on the way. I mean, there was the reason the motto was like move fast and break things. Like, the break things was very, very much part of their culture. And oddly, like, I know I'm the last person in the world who feels this way, but I always, in the kind of Musk Zuckerberg face-off, I always was I'm like sort of sympathetic. Musk is an idealist. Like he's much weirder than Zuckerberg, but he does have kind of ambitions for humanity that stretch beyond his own greed. And that doesn't mean that what he's doing isn't awful as well. It is awful, but at least I do sort of feel there's a kind of strange grandeur and a kind of like he does. I do think he wants to make the world a better place in his own perverse, crazy ways. Zuckerberg has always felt like very off to me, and
from the beginning.
Yeah,
I agree. I mean, I think to take your young viewers back, Mark Zuckerberg basically thought he was going to run for president as a Democrat. Do you remember this when he started to travel
his
the
listening
country?
tour?
Yeah, and it was Sheryl Sandberg was going to be governor of California, and Mark Zuckerberg was going to be president of the United States, and the whole world would unite around Facebook. Well, that didn't happen. After 2016, he did a variety of things that suggested that social media companies could check themselves. Because remember, on the outside of this is not like, oh, Mark Zuckerberg, saw what was happening and wanted to be good. He was worried about oversight and regulation of social media companies, which just barely happened at this stage. So he takes it upon himself. He creates, remember this, I don't even know if it still exists, this like Supreme Court of Facebook and everything was so austere.
The Facebook Oversight Board.
Yeah, the Facebook Oversight Board. I mean, where were they on this issue?
And the Garland Justice Department.
Exactly. And then he, and they issue rulings about Facebook. I mean, it was like mad, right? But he sort of thought himself as president of this thing. And then he looks around and he sees there's actually another real president, and there's even a vice president who is a social media company owner, and that's Elon Musk. And so for the last couple months, all he can do is think about how can I get into that limelight, because no credible person with credible lawyers, the Facebook lawyers are smart, the Facebook outside counsel are smart, would tell you that Texas is a free speech state. It is not. I mean, it is.
They literally are passing laws accusing social media companies of censorship.
Right, exactly. So it just basically means they're going to gut, anything having to do with this fact-checking group. Now, it could be that there were abuses with this fact-checking capacity, but the benefit of an outside fact-checking capacity as compared to, notes from crowdsourcing is a belief that 2 + 2 = 4. Right. And in other words, you get off the platform things that aren't debatable anymore or harmful, like child pornography or terrorism or plans to mow down a bunch of people in New Orleans. You can get those off the platform without waiting for a community to actually tell you that these are bad things. He doesn't want that authority, and he let 1,000 daisies bloom, I guess, on the platform.
Well, but I think they do want the authority. I mean, they're not going to allow child pornography on with that. They're not going to have a community notes feature for child porn or for
right. I mean, they have
terrorism.
Wait a second, though. High-level content moderation.
Right. The high-level content moderation will occur. There's a lot of things short of I'm dragging this kid from point A to point B that you would not want on a platform if you were a conscientious social media CEO. And he's giving that up. I mean, it's just clear that's what he's doing. And the consumer is going to have to decide whether they want to be a part of it or not. But this capitulation is as I think is true to who he is and what Facebook actually is. But I also think the horrible thing about it is he thinks we're all stupid. I mean, I watched that video.
We're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US.
The Democrats didn't embrace him. He's angry about that. And now he's going to the Republicans. It's as simple as that. He wanted to be president of the United States, period.
One of the things I find super interesting about Meta is that it's It's obviously a terrible company that has failed with all of its big, ambitious projects. Crypto failed. Its AI so far is a dud. Metaverse, an amazing $50 billion flop. Yet it's still incredibly successful. It is fantastically successful by any measure, and more profitable than ever, even though it's also a genuinely awful company that does awful things. It's almost the most paradoxical company I can think of. Like X is a ridiculous company, and X is no longer a business success. It is a great success for Elon Musk, but it is no longer a business success as itself. Facebook continues to be a huge business success, even though everything it does is kind of awful. And I'm quite confused by that.
Well, the network effect of the actual Facebook site. Instagram has, a success, and WhatsApp network has been huge, which another part of the Zuckerberg video that really struck me was when he started calling on the Trump administration to help defend Facebook against incursions on free speech in other countries. I mean, okay, what? Like that is basically a shot across the bow to the Europeans who are interested in tighter, stricter regulation of these social media companies and their harms than the United States. And I think what Zuckerberg is saying is like the Trump administration is supposed to march behind him and Musk into challenging and dismantling their regulations, meaning that the American libertarian approach to free speech then has to be everywhere in the world, even though we know it has done enormous harm, especially in places like Myanmar and India and Brazil, where it literally, you can track the ethnic violence to what spreads on these apps. And then I was thinking about all these different properties that Meta owns. And, the Europeans, I think the ball is in their court in terms of standing up to Musk and Zuckerberg and this call for deregulation, which is not in their interest. But then you think about these other properties that, Meta and Musk own. Like WhatsApp is really important as a communication service, all over the world. Does that hobble the Europeans? What about Starlink, which Musk owns, and has the sort of fundamental error been to allow these people to amass so much power in these different aspects of life that have these like real implications? I mean, they truly do just have way, way too much power.
Zuckerberg talks about a cultural moment. I mean, if you really want to reflect the cultural moment, it is that social media has actually been bad for, in particular, Americans in terms of loneliness, isolation, lack of connectivity, all the stuff that's being documented. And he could have done, I mean, you think about the power he has and where he's chosen to assert it under the guise of free speech. And it's exceptionally frustrating, I have to say. I mean, it is, they can, if you go back a bit to the Arab Spring, there was a brief moment when Facebook essentially took credit for the Egypt revolution and then quietly sauntered off as the forces of retrenchment also used Facebook to disrupt the free speech of protesters. And so this idea that, I mean, he's not stupid. So that's the thing that's frustrating about his video is he's not stupid. He thinks we're stupid. I mean, we know when you say you want more truth, what does that even mean? Does that mean 2 + 2 = 5? Because I can find someone who will find that to be truthful.
I always remind myself of this heuristic. I can't remember who coined it, but when you think of free products, and Facebook basically only makes free products, WhatsApp is free, Facebook is free, Instagram is free. When the product is free, you're the product. And we see that the way in which we're manipulated. Before we leave this, first of all, fascism is when corporations put themselves at the service of a government or leader. And that's what is also so alarming about what we see happening with these companies is they are literally putting themselves at the service of a new government because it advantages them, and that's a disturbing precedent. Before we go, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts both on the Amazon deal with Melania Trump and on what Elon Musk is doing to insert himself into right-wing politics in Europe, insert himself into politics in Europe by advancing ultra-right-wing anti-immigrant causes. Emily Baz?
Well, I mean, about Musk, I thought, related to what I was saying earlier, that he can see that they are more interested in regulating him. And so he's messing around with their politics and throwing his weight around in this confusing way that even seems to have pissed off his ally, Nigel Farage. And then with Amazon, I mean, what is there to say? It just looks like this totally blatant, obsequious move that the company is making. And you can blame Trump for making it so clear that this is how you kiss the ring. But, these corporate decision makers don't have to abdicate any sense of independence and just kind of holding the line at this moment of transition. And that's what they're doing.
I mean, I think the Jeff Bezos thing is just like, who wants this? Like, is there a market for watching Melania Trump? Who is she even moving to the White House? Like, sort of walking around and whatever. I mean, and I was glad to read that a number of other production companies actually passed on it. At least there's some backbone there. So this is just a $50 million check to the Trump administration to be nice to Bezos, whose foray into media with the Washington Post has been a disaster for the Post and a disaster and horrible for, I guess, financially for him. I think this reflects where these guys are anyway. And now they feel licensed to just play it out, right? This is where they're going to take it. I tend to think the Elon Musk thing is going to hit a wall. Elon Musk will hit a wall. I mean, part of that is a little bit maybe, David, like what you said, which is because he has like some theory of the world rather than just being transactional, right? So Zuckerberg is just transactional. Zuckerberg has no theory of the world. But Elon does. And I think that you're going to see, I think, a sort of growing check on him in the sense like people don't listen to him as much. He's going to be not as powerful. He's going to lose political battles. And also because he kind of does have these aspects to him that want to help, like Starlink or even space exploration. He's going to want to protect those. And he's just he's truly a strange human being. His background, everything is his baby mamas, like all that stuff. He's just a very strange, and I think not very likable. And I can just see all of that creating sort of maybe a check on him in some ways.
I basically agree with you guys about the Melania Trump deal, but I would note that there are lots now. This thing of the docuseries that's controlled by the subject is like a thing. That's the Beckham documentary.
Beyonce
was controlled by the Beckham, and they make a bunch of money for the subject, and they make a bunch of money for the platform that hosts them. Some of them are good. I mean, I think the Beckham one I thought was fantastic. I think the question really is Melania Trump a subject who merits it, and is what she's being paid in line with what her interest, with what its real value? And I guess we just don't know. I mean, it may be that everyone's going to want to see it. Maybe it'll be fascinating. I mean, also the timing of it, right? Like, what would we have said if Amazon had announced this deal about Jill Biden 4 years ago? Yeah, it would have been seen as deeply, deeply corrupt. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Found. When you're a small business owner, having your bookkeeping and taxes in order comes at a cost. It's not only your money, it's also your time, hours and hours that you could have spent actually growing your business. But guess what? It does not have to be that way, thanks to Found. Found is a banking platform that doesn't merely consolidate your financial ecosystem. It automates manual activities like expense tracking and finding tax write-offs. And it makes staying on top of invoices and payments incredibly easy. That's why small businesses are loving Found. This Found user said, Found is going to save me so much headache. It makes everything so much easier. Expenses, income, profits, taxes, invoices even. And Found has 30,000 5-star reviews just like this. Don't put this one off. Join thousands of small business owners who've streamlined their finances with Found. Open a Found account for free at found.com/Gabfest. Found is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services are provided by Piermont Bank, member FDIC.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today? Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. And that's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you can save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states and situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
The Los Angeles wildfires, as we're taping on Thursday morning, are burning out of control. There's a new fire in the Hollywood Hills, fueled by hot, dry summer and fall, the failure of any rain to arrive in the fall and early winter, accelerated by the extremely hot hurricane-strength winds that are coming over from the east, from Nevada. These fires have burned thousands of acres in some of the most densely populated parts of California. More than 2,000 structures as of Thursday morning have burned. By the time these fires are out, this will, I think, almost certainly be the most costly natural disaster in American history, maybe in world history. Not because it's destroying more than other things, but because it's destroying some of the most valuable real estate in America, and the costs of that will be enormous. More than 1.5 million people are without power. Firefighters are having a very hard time getting enough water to control the fires. And the fires are basically uncontrollable, and they're waiting for nature to give them a break. So, Juliette, you've written a book about disasters. You were at Homeland Security, where I'm sure you had to think about, I know you've had to think about sort of how disasters affect the country. Why is California so prone, and why is Los Angeles at the moment prone to fires like this?
It is a unique and horrible moment because the combination of the hot summer with the no rain, California can get a lot of rain, Los Angeles can get a lot of rain, and the winds, which the National Weather Service had been warning a week ago could be catastrophic for Los Angeles, all merged in a horrible sort of combination of weather-related events. Some of these are related to climate change, of course, the dryness, the lack of rain, the heat, and some of it just has to do with what we call the WUI, the wildland urban interface that is Los Angeles. We forget this. It's Hollywood, it's the fancy people, it's the nice cars. It is also the biggest experiment in the wildland urban interface because there is lots and lots of forestry around Los Angeles, even as it gets built out. There's 4 now as we speak. We don't know what's going to happen today, but you've got the Palisades, the Eaton, and the Hearst fires. You now also have a Hollywood fire. I don't know what the status of it is right now, and massive evacuations and the destruction of the most expensive homes. This will be incredibly expensive. Firefighters, CAL FIRE is the fire department that is sort of the lead right now. It is trained in this kind of firefighting, so no one should blame them. They know how to do wildland fires in urban areas because of the uniqueness of the terrain in California. The scale and intensity of this just overwhelmed them, and because of the winds, they cannot do the one thing that is sort of the number one tool to fight these kinds of things, which is aerial water drops. I think they're going to start more aggressively now as the winds die down. So it's a horror. It is going to be expensive. The California has an insurance company of last resort that is likely to falter. The politics of this have already gotten quite extreme, with Trump sort of blaming things that aren't really relevant in terms of sort of water pressure and are we protecting the environment too much? I should just say that municipal water supply systems are not built for wildland fire response. And so, yes, they're going to run out of water, but the pressure is back up. But this is unfolding in real time, and there'll be a lot of lessons to learn.
I want to talk about the insurer thing in a minute, but before we get to that, I think there's been this line, whenever someone else experiences a natural disaster, it's, well, you shouldn't live in harm's way, but that's it's not a useful thing to say in this country anymore. I mean, if you consider that probably all of Florida is effectively in harm's way, and now it seems like a lot of California is in harm's way. What are we supposed to make of that, Juliette? Should people not live in harm's way, or is it just we have to be realistic that we're living in harm's way, and either I'm no longer insurable, or this is just a cost that society has to, we have to globally insure the country and say everyone can live in harm's way and we'll help you rebuild because that's just the world we live in.
It's a great point, but there's scales of harm. We certainly know that there's going to be areas that should not be rebuilt or not inhabitable. And we should think about that in terms of, this word managed retreat that it has a lot that's quite loaded, but throughout the world, governments are assisting people in leaving communities that are just simply too much in harm's way, right? So we don't have the political will for it. Even blue states don't have, blue states, which should be more receptive and understanding of what climate change is bringing, don't like the idea of it. It can harm the very communities that have sort of the least access. And I get it, but we're going to have to start to think seriously about relative harms. The second is, yes, we're all in harm's way, and our incentive structures are not built to acknowledge that. So whether it's insurance, regulations, requirements for home ownership. I've spent a lot of time on this. I was in Oklahoma this summer for a documentary I co-host, and there are towns in red Oklahoma who have now building codes that are stricter than almost any other building codes in the country. And they are not a big deal, right? They're sort of, in the sense that nails used to be 8 inches apart. Now they need to be 4 inches apart. They add a couple $1,000s to building construction. We know how to do this. And I think we're going to have to start to think seriously about not just incentivizing good building behavior by individuals and the businesses, but also penalizing. I think we're at the stick stage, and we got to do it fast. But you're exactly right. It's just relative harm at this stage.
I mean, are the insurance companies and the faltering you were talking about the kind of reality check that's going to force a different kind of construction? And is one possibility here that you just change the way you think about building, that you're not necessarily building to last, you're building more cheaply, kind of imagining that this is not going to be able to withstand the next net? No. Tell me why you're shaking your head.
The goal is to build in order to manage the fire and impede what's called the fire ladder. The problem that's going on right now is that LA is dense and these buildings are not built these houses are not built to withstand fire for reasons that go back to freedom and money and what people in Los Angeles, where I grew up, wanted. And so that's when we talk about the pace of these fires, it's because there's no retardant. So what you want to do is you want to build things, and we know how to do this. We know how to do this in wildland areas that can retard or delay this fire ladder. That's what you're seeing now. You're just seeing ladder being basically everything's connected. And therefore the fires are getting big. The alternative it's a good point, is the alternative that we just don't give a damn about structures anymore. And that's the better alternative because we know they're going to have to be rebuilt. The problem is that there are human beings that live in those structures, and those structures, if not resilient, will harm human beings. And I don't know what the death toll is going to be, but the fact it's only 3 is pretty incredible.
I actually think it's 5 as of this morning.
Is it 5? Okay, the fact it's 5. Yeah.
But I think that gets to an interesting point, which is that you can have this disaster will end up costing, it will cost people all their possessions. It will cost a few people their lives. But ultimately what it will cost is just an insane amount of money to either rebuild or make whole or make partial all these people who've lost real estate, developers and owners of property. And that's a human cost. It's just not a death cost. It's a human cost. And I guess that gets the insurance question, which is what are we supposed to do in places like Florida or maybe in California, where the risk of natural disaster is so high that they are effectively uninsurable? And so you have these in Florida. I think there's basically a state insurance program, but that state insurance program will not withstand a very severe hurricane. And so then it's is it that you don't have insurance, or it's that the federal government has now been socialized to the national government is going to have to bail out the California state insurer? Is that what's going to happen?
So it's interesting. So every state does have an insurer of last resort. California's is likely to falter as well. So I'm going to now sound like Mark Zuckerberg, which is insurance companies will have to raise premiums. And the debate between consumer protections and insurance companies needing to raise their rates is probably going to favor the insurance companies, because you want people to have insurance. I mean, for a variety of reasons. Actually, I mean, we know the insurance is relatively good for a variety of reasons. And so I do think that, like in California over the last 2 years, it had a lot of consumer protections. That is why a lot of the insurance companies left, because they could not raise rates above a certain amount, despite what the climate was telling them was going on. And California finally decided to change some of those 1980s consumer protection laws. So blue states are going to have to favor the insurance companies' risk assessments, because they tend to be pretty good. Insurance companies want to make money, people. They tend to be pretty good. Red states are going to have to begin to regulate in areas that they tend not to want to. And we have seen this on the local level. There's also, I mean, I obviously know a lot about insurance, but there's also some creative solutions that are going on. They're all sort of pilots, but I think we're going to have to scale them, including communities buying group insurance. So no single individual has to determine how they were harmed, and working with insurance companies to set an appropriate rate for that community. But this is going to kill a lot of smaller insurance companies and change the face of Los Angeles for decades. I grew up there, and I mean. And I grew up in the 80s, and that was the time that, you took the bus to those beaches that you're seeing in Malibu and hung out and put baby oil on your body. And I was, a teenager in LA in the 80s, and I can't believe what I'm seeing.
Let's go to cocktail chatter. Emily Bazelon, when you are sharing I don't know if you're having a dry January. I'm having a dry January, but when you maybe aren't, when you're sharing a extremely delicious glass of red wine with Mr. Bazelon, what are you going to be chatting about?
I am kind of obsessed with lead levels and their effect on people.
The Romans.
Yes. Oh my God. Did you read this article?
Yes.
At least, so I read about this new study in the Washington Post. The Washington Post article is by Leo Sands. This is such a crazy set of findings. So, some researchers have figured out that the lead pollution in the Roman Empire from silver mining was high enough to lower IQs. This is a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And the technique for this study was just kind of amazing. The scientists analyzed the presence of lead in ice cores from the Arctic, preserved from the time of the Pax Romana in 27 BC, and were able to trace the amount of lead deposited in the Arctic, and showing how they spiked. The idea is that the tiny lead particles are drifting over from Europe on air currents. And they found that, it was possible that kids all over the empire had lead levels that were high enough to chop 3 IQ points off of their score. Then there's this also just reference to our era in the United States, in which, right, crazy, the peak era of leaded gasoline in the United States from the late 1960s to the early 1980s. This is our childhoods as Gen X. Lead level was so heavy that kids probably lost 9 points of IQ. I mean, maybe this is why our generation cannot figure out how to run the world properly.
Can you imagine how good the Gabfest would be without lead? Can you imagine how much smarter Emily Bazelon would be?
Man, I guess all of us.
Can you imagine what an Emily Bazelon not compromised by years of lead exposure would be like?
I don't know. I feel like
it shocks the imagination.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't know about you guys. My kids make fun of my husband and me constantly about this. Like, just that our generation is all brain damaged effectively. So yeah, we'll see if they do better.
Fortunately, our listeners are just as stupid.
Oh my God.
We've all worn it out. Nobody's got any brain cells left. They're entertained by our
we have listeners of different generations.
Oh, really?
So
like
some of them,
Yeah.
right?
So our
That's
young
why they
listeners
have,
are
our older listeners apparently.
they're sitting there
It's
being
just
like,
the
oh, these poor benighted people. They can barely string a word
Exactly.
together. Juliette, what is your chatter?
So I'm going to do a recommendation of our new streaming favorite at home, which is like kind of depressing, but I do think everyone should watch it. And this is the new Lockerbie miniseries. It's called A Search for Truth. I don't know if people are watching it, but it's gotten a lot of play, and it's just a reminder that talking about generational, it's a reminder of 1988 December. 259 passengers, Pan Am going down, Lockerbie itself, and whether, in the narrative of Lockerbie, I think about a dozen people died on the ground. It's a visually stunning show with Colin Firth, who's a great actor, but it's also about maybe, getting to our previous discussion, sort of the search for truth and his unwavering belief in the law that then becomes wavering as Jim Swire, who lost a daughter on the plane, comes to understand how much the British knew, how much the U.S. knew, and whether the person in jail was actually responsible for the killings. It's a miniseries, so watch it with all the drama that it entails. We've really enjoyed it because it really does challenge what we believed about Lockerbie, what came to be known about Lockerbie, about realpolitik and countries trying to get out of trouble, about what the United States knew. People forget that the United States had told its State Department employees not to use Pan Am. It sort of knew enough that Pan Am was being targeted. And The Search for Truth by One Father. That's our story.
My chatter. First of all, I don't know if you guys can hear this, but the Carter funeral is happening right now at the National Cathedral around the corner, and there are helicopters all around my house. So if there are helicopter noises, that's what it is. I have two chatters. First, quickly, I just want to refer folks who are interested in Elon Musk or Las Vegas or tunnels to a great project that my colleagues at CityCast Las Vegas did in collaboration with ProPublica, which they investigated the Boring Company's tunnel project in Las Vegas, which is just such a strange project. It's basically the convention authority of Las Vegas teamed up with Elon Musk's Boring Company to build a series of tunnels under Las Vegas in which you get in a Tesla and you're driven by a human driver through a tunnel from one spot near the convention center to another spot near the convention center. And now they have a series of government agencies with basically no public input has approved 68 miles of this tunnel system. They're building a mass transit system underneath Las Vegas, but nobody kind of was involved in the permitting of it. There's no monitoring of it. The Boring Company kind of operates under its own rules. It's really interesting about how private project can become kind of a public good.
Totally agree that this was really interesting.
Thank you. Good. Well, check it out at CityCast Las Vegas had an episode about it on Wednesday, and then on CityCast Las Vegas and ProPublica have an article about it. But that's not really my chatter. My real chatter is, and there's going to be a little bit of spoilage if you are interested in Wicked or A Complete Unknown. So break is a chance to see movies, and so I got to see both Wicked and A Complete Unknown. Have you guys seen those movies?
We talked about A Complete Unknown last week.
But have you seen Wicked, Emily?
No, I have not seen Wicked.
But you've seen both, Juliette?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Here's my realization, my insight. They're the same movie.
Oh my God. What?
Wicked, they're the same movie. They're both about, there's a charismatic, brooding outsider with magic in their fingers who shows up from nowhere into the heart of the culture, becomes the darling of the establishment.
Fashion icon.
Befriended by an angel-voiced beauty, then breaks away from the constraints of the established order, defies gravity, goes electric, whatever.
Makes a super long movie.
Storms off alone on your broomstick or motorcycle. It's like literally the same movie when you stop to think about it.
I love that.
That is pretty good.
It's just a note. Can't wait to see A Complete Unknown 2. Anyway, both great movies. Enjoyed them both. But I was like, I feel like I've seen this one when I was watching A Complete Unknown. I was like, I feel like I've seen this before. What was it? And then I realized
A Complete Unknown was really good. And I was not like, oh, I'm a Bob Dylan. I mean, I like Bob Dylan, but I'm not like one of these people who's like, well, that wasn't factually accurate. Like whatever. It is a joy to watch, very mellow. It was like lovely. I loved it. Yeah. And he's interesting.
Me too. Listeners, you've kept the chatters flowing to us, flowing like a fine cocktail yourself. And you've emailed them to us at gabfest@slate.com. Please keep them coming. And our listener chatter this week is from Emily in Minneapolis.
Hi, Gabfest. This is Emily Ziering in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'd like to recommend this article from The Ringer, Asleep at the Wheel in the Headlight Brightness Wars. It's a fascinating and aggravating read and a great example of how so often corporations, government regulators, and nonprofits all refuse to take ownership of a problem and instead point to one another for solutions. Thank you.
Always love to hear from an Emily. That is all for our episode this week, but we also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about the memory holing of January 6th, but that's just for Slate Plus members. Slate Plus members get these bonus episodes. They get discounts to our live shows. They don't hit the paywall on the Slate site, but if you're not a member, you can't hear it. So become a member. You can subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. That is all for our show today. The Gabfest is produced by Cheyna Roth. Our researcher is Julie Huygen. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond, Senior Director for Podcast Ops. Alicia Montgomery is the VP of Audio for Slate. For Emily Bazelon and the always delightful and brilliant Juliette Kayyem, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.